So without further ado, I will let our panelists introduce themselves, just to let you know a little more about what they get up to. I think our title card order was Lucy, Sean and Becky. So Lucy, I'll start off with you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lucy Furneaux. I am the Student Opportunities Coordinator at the University of York Students' Union, or USU. So I basically do all the operational management for 234 student groups. So that's societies and student media day to day. So we've got 10 student media groups, and they take up a disproportionate amount of my time, but I love them for it. They're a real kind of one of the favourite bits of my job working with student media. I'm a former student journalist, so I have seen both sides of the coin, shall we say. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here and chat all things student media, because that's all I feel like I do on Twitter. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm Sean. I'm the Student Engagement Coordinator at Glasgow University's Queen Margaret Union, and I'm also since January been responsible for media and communications. Which means that on the creating side and the editing side of our student media, I'm the sort of last port before they go to print. We're unique in Glasgow in that we have 4 student bodies. Every one of those student bodies have their own student media teams, and then there's a newspaper called the Glasgow Guardian, which sort of interacts with all of us. I was also a sabbatical officer at Dundee before, so I've got experience of working with student media from that side of things, and I've also been lucky to be published in our student media before, writing about Nick Cage, which was not that long ago.
And Becky?
Hi, yes, so I'm Becky Sliwa Webb, and I am the Media and Performance Coordinator at Sheffield Students' Union, and that's the University of Sheffield. And yeah, so I work primarily with Forge Media, who is our student media groups, and that's Forge Press, Forge TV and Forge Radio. And they all work collaboratively under the umbrella of Forge Media. And I also work with Film Unit Cinema and the performance groups as well, just to support them in all their various amazing activity. And I've been doing that for a couple of years. Prior to that, I worked more in film, actually. I worked for a documentary festival and in film distribution as well. So I kind of come to the role with experience of some licensing stuff, the very glamorous media law and like risk management stuff that I help advise with as well. Yeah.
I think you're definitely our most kind of multimedia person on this panel. I mean, being SBA, we're going to chat primarily about published media, either written and printed or just published online. A shout out also to the Student Radio Association, the SRA. They are hosting a similar session to this one, which is kind of an extension session that's going to be looking at multimedia. Theirs is on Saturday from 5:30, sorry. And that's how student multimedia and STUs can work together. But I'm glad that all of you mentioned kind of all the different outlets that you mentor, because I think it's so important to have an open discussion about what we can do for different student media outlets as student unions and what staff can do. For any of you who joined the session yesterday with Lauren Razavi, that was such a good Q&A panel, because she was actually coming in, much like yourself, Lucy, from coming in from being a student media person. She was part of Concrete, and she then went on to have this amazing career in freelancing. And student media, for so many people, is their first job opportunity. It's their first time they've had something published. There's just so many firsts that come with that, because it's essentially the biggest gig that you get to do at uni. And if that's your kind of area of passion, I suppose, because not everybody will be a journalism student, it is your first opportunity to learn what that field can be like. So one of the first questions that we had coming in was, so because all of you are involved with the thriving media outlets, and actually somebody on the chat, Lucy, said, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's 10 media outlets in York. It's huge. And actually, for anyone who isn't part of the SBA, we held our national conference last year in York, and this year we're holding it in Sheffield. So I say holding, it could be virtual, but Sheffield are still certainly the hosts.
In one way or another, we'll make it happen.
I hope so. I was so looking forward to visiting your campus, because I've heard great things. I know in previous years NASTA have held their conference in Sheffield SU, and they had amazing things to say. So we'll make that one work. But yes, like I said, the first question was, are you all involved with thriving student media outlets on your respective campuses? And Sean, you've seen 2 different campuses as well in the roles that you've had as SU president in my old uni and now in Glasgow. But what things do your university and your students' union do to support the student media?
Well, I mean, talking about Glasgow, if I got of my experiences, obviously directly with our award-winning magazine, Communicate. They, other than, you know, helping them with training when they get into their position, so they've got quite a range of roles. They're mostly, I also have a really noisy dog. They're also self-funded, so we help them get sponsors, but to be honest, they do most of that themselves. I also have a role in helping them to engage with at Freshers Week and at refreshers, and throughout the year trying to engage with new students. They are probably, to be honest, one of our most successful student groups at the QMU. But then where the difficulties come in is the competition between the different student media outlets, because at Glasgow it's not so much a collaborative way of working as a competitive way of working. And although each sort of outlet has their own niche, very often if you write for one, and that's the one you write for, and they try and cover different things, but also just like which union you belong to defines you, I think also which magazine you pick up sort of defines who you are. So we try and help our media volunteers to produce the best magazine. I mean, it's got our name in it. It's a reflection of the union, and the volunteers and what they produce is a reflection of the union, and therefore it's my job, and right now it's just my job to make sure that they have the tools and the training to produce real top quality stuff. And then beyond that, it's also about making sure that whenever we do events, so like I was saying before we came on about live gigs and stuff, it's ensuring that they have the opportunity to meet the bands, to get backstage access, to have content that the other unions maybe can't provide their media teams, because they've got a lot more money than we do. So we have to find creative ways to help them achieve what they want.
For sure, I think Albie was barking in agreement there.
Yeah, I'm sorry, he's a Yorkie, so.
It's okay, I hope there's dog lovers. Just give Albie some love in the chat. Lucy, do you also find that, I mean, we're saying about competition, do you find that York is much the same, that everybody's competing a little bit about what one you belong to, who you shouldn't write for, who you should write for, getting involved?
Yes and no. We have, one of the things that's really great about York's media scene is we have a broadsheet and we have a tabloid, and there is very much a sense of you're one or the other. And sometimes it's friendly banter, sometimes it's perhaps a little more heated, which is maybe when I would get involved. But we've also seen this year a lot more collaboration between the groups, which is really, really nice. We have something that we call Media Committee at York, which is basically a forum for a representative from each of our media groups. And they'll come, we have a meeting, sit down, it's chaired by the activities officer. And we also have a multimedia rep and a print media rep. And I sit in on the meetings as well to take the minutes and like provide information and that kind of thing. And Media Committee is not always the happiest, nicest place to be. It can sometimes get quite heated at times. But what we have found is having Media Committee has meant that it's given the groups a lot more of an opportunity to explore things like collaboration, ways they can work together on stuff. It's definitely kind of led to some really nice link ups between different groups. So our TV station, our radio station, for example, and it's sort of enabled them to forge relationships with each other outside of the media circle as well. So we found that's been really beneficial on the whole for helping groups to kind of collaborate more and be less competitive or less negatively competitive, because I really feel that having two different papers ups the quality of both of them, because they're kind of trying to like better each other. But things like the SPA National Conference last year was in part a collaborative effort. So for us, it on the whole works quite well. And certainly between our tabloid and our satirical magazine, there's some really, really nice connections there, which tends to work quite well. So yeah, I think it on the whole is a good way to operate things. But that doesn't mean to say that it is all smooth sailing.
Becky, is that a similar situation in Sheffield, or is it anything different that you do?
We do have smaller magazines. We have like a site and sort of online primarily rather than published, like science blogs and lifestyle sort of online magazines. There aren't really many groups that do publish printed material outside of Forge, which I think it probably boils down more to cost than anything else. So the reason Forge Press are able to print as much as they do is because they're a committee rather than a society, which is different for us in Sheffield. I don't know if it is the same in other SUs as well, but a working committee is slightly different and gets a pot of money from the SU to do their activity. And it means they don't have to charge membership, so it's free for anyone to join and get involved in instead of paying for a society membership. So that's probably why there isn't maybe as much competition, that really the printed content does come from Forge. But as a group, I think we're in a really good place now with Forge Media working collaboratively across all 3 different media outlets. I think historically that hasn't always been the case. They all started at different times. They didn't spring up as Forge Media at the start. They've kind of, it's been a slow process. I'm quite fortunate that when I started, there was already collaborative working in place, and that sort of continued to go from strength to strength. So we have regular catch-ups, the chair of each media outlet, and they also do have a small shared budget, which encourages them to do work together that is like funded collaboratively, so that it keeps them working on different events and activities together. Things like covering the officer elections and varsity, they do really, really big projects on, and we kind of encourage them all to work really closely together on that, which seems to go really well.
Yeah, I think that sounds quite familiar to a lot of the student publications that we mentor at the SPA. I like the point that you made about it being a free membership. I know this session is open to staff as well, but if you're aware, just on the campus that you're on, could you put in the chat whether your student media or your preferred student media outlet that you're part of if you're a student is paid membership or if it's free? It would be very interesting to know, just with the amount of variety that we have. Some publications are, some aren't, some are treated as societies, some are incorporated as their own kind of entities as a company as well. There's just so much variety there. I'm going to jump to some of the questions that are on the Zoom chat just now. One person is saying, so this is RSU, I don't know which university that is, too many acronyms, but how have you found, what have you found to be the best way to get departments relating to media? So for example, the digital media courses, and how would you get them to work with the societies and media groups?
It's a tough one for us at York because we don't have like a journalism degree, for example, which I think is one of the reasons that the media tends to thrive, because it's like the only place they can engage in it. They can't do it as part of their course, they have to do it as part of the SU. So it's not something I can particularly speak on apart from within our student television station, and they do quite a lot of good work with the like theatre, film and television department that we have at York. Quite a lot of them are studying on that degree and bring their work across to put it into the TV station. But yeah, we're quite different in that respect, that we can't work or collaborate with a journalism department, for example.
Yeah, do you find that's quite similar, Becky? And I don't know if Becky, if you want to take that one first.
So, I mean, we're quite fortunate in Sheffield that we have a really incredible journalism department at the university. So we do attract to Forge Press quite a few journalism students, not entirely. It is a really diverse group of students that get involved, but because it does attract journalism students who maybe want to do slightly different kind of work outside of their degree, they do bring with them great experience and insider knowledge of what it's like to be studying as a up and coming journalist. So in a way, the committees benefit from that and that kind of information sharing and everyone kind of learning together. But we don't necessarily do really any direct collaborations. And as Lucy was saying, Sheffield doesn't have a media degree of any kind. So again, our offering for stuff like the TV and radio stations and also our cinema is quite a novelty, and it's something that the students wouldn't be able to engage in otherwise. So again, there isn't really the opportunity to collaborate there, unfortunately.
Yeah, in Glasgow, people who are students who are studying and who want to move towards a career in journalism tend to gravitate more towards the Glasgow Guardian newspaper, because that is the sort of training ground. We tend to work more with students from humanities and with students that are interested in music and art. And because of the relationships we are building as a union with those schools, because those are the schools where the majority of our members come from. Because again, in Glasgow, there's the 4 student bodies, and you can be a member of them all or none of them. You know, we don't have. It's not like every member of Glasgow University, every student at Glasgow University isn't a member of our students' union. So through our collaboration with those schools on things such as like careers fairs and things like that, we'll make sure that we advertise strongly and always bring along volunteers from our student media team, because that's one of our strongest assets, and that also just happens to be the pool of students who most closely match the interests of which our magazine covers. But to be honest, that a lot of the hard work is done by the volunteers themselves. So we really just open up the channels for them to take advantage of, rather than me directly being the one who brings students to them.
Yeah, best way to do it, really. I totally agree with that. It's a question that's very, very popular on the chat just now, is, I imagine, on everybody's mind, and all 3 of you have been furloughed at the moment, which is so kind of you to come on and chat to us. So how, I suppose the question is kind of more multimedia, but to expand it a little bit and say into printed media as well, especially when you're needing usage of different materials in order to get your publication out. How could and should an SU support their radio station when becoming COVID secure for when we reopen, is the question, but you can expand out a little bit more just to cater to other publications that you mentor as well.
That's an easy one. It's an easy one for me, because we don't have a radio station, so that's not my responsibility. But I think that, well, when our building reopens, it has to be safe for everybody to be in, and in terms of the health of the volunteers, the media, their concerns will be the same as every person that enters our building. We'll have to make sure that it's safe for anyone before we let anyone in. Never mind media. I think we'll have to look into how we support our volunteers to be safe when they are producing articles out with the students union, when gigs and stuff reopen, and when art exhibitions etc. happen again, and our students want to go and cover them. We'll have to help support them to make sure that in the safest way possible. And I'm sure we'll get to the sort of issue with finance soon enough, unless you want to touch on it now. But I mean, we were skint before this happened, and it's only going to be worse when it comes out. But yeah, we'll have to look into a sort of risk assessment and a safety plan to ensure that our student media volunteers feel comfortable in the risky situations, which will be when they go out and conduct interviews or reviews of things out with our building.
Yeah, and for big campuses as well, the whole risk assessment thing is going to become very, very important. I mean, Sheffield and York, you guys are both very, very big campuses. Potentially Sheffield more so, would I be right in saying that, Becky?
I'm actually not sure what the sizes between us. I know as an SU building, it's a really, really big space, which is fortunate, but has its own challenges as well. So at the moment, it's still really in the planning stages. I'm hoping, over the next couple of weeks or so, I should be returning to work and able to kind of piece some more guidance together. But the challenge right now is working out how much of our energy and resources we put into potentially assuming that we may not be able to use a physical space for a while, depending on what the guidelines are around the number of people in a space. Our radio studios are great, but they're not very big, and if you have to, you know, maintain a 2-meter distance between people, one of the studios will only fit one person in and the other might fit 2. So you are really shrinking down the kind of potential for what you can do in that space. But our radio members have been doing stuff remotely instead at the moment. So they've got this isolation podcast that they've been working on. So it is possible to do stuff without the space for now. So yeah, I guess the question is for how long we have to plan for perhaps for things to be online before we can even move back to that physical space, and then having to follow the guidelines that are there to do that. It's going to be interesting, but having spoken to some of the new chairs that are obviously now just in place and starting to plan, they're all amazingly resourceful and creative. So I think it's a lot of like just kind of getting all our heads together and trying to work out what is possible and what isn't. But it's still kind of early to say, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, it's certainly something we have to follow the university's lead on. We don't have student media offices or spaces within our building. They're very spread out across campus in various different buildings that the university is kind enough to let us have. So we'll definitely have to kind of follow their lead on when they want to allow people in and out. But like you guys, like our student radio has, their computing team has put together a whole program, which means they can broadcast remotely, and they've been doing that all through term, which has been phenomenal. Our TV station have done a weekly like show, which has kind of been an hour long, where they've done different challenges that they've all filmed at home, given the news on it. Like they're doing kind of really great innovative stuff. And the same with our print media, whether we've had a weekly kind of small condensed version of different like print magazines or newspapers, or just stuff going up online regularly. They've kind of really thrived in this environment in a way that I was quite worried for them as to sort of how they would feel able to respond to this as a challenge. And they just completely blown my expectations out of the water, which has been great to see while I've sort of not been at work as well. Like they're just fine without me. Like they don't really need me. It's good. So yeah, I'd love to see them back in their spaces, but it's so hard to know what that could really look like. And yeah, it's something we've really got to sort of play by ear and let the university direct more than anything, which I think they're getting to, but I'm very out of the loop at the moment.
Yeah, completely understandable, just with not being on the campuses, and if you've been far away from any kind of management people and what announcements they've been putting out, it's difficult to know exactly what it is. But like you say, it's play it by ear. It's the best way to do it, and just everybody as well individually knowing the size of your team and what you require, just kind of being sensible in that regard as well. Another question that's specifically for Lucy, but I do want to extend it to the rest of the panel as well. So a media committee, is media committee just for the affiliated student groups, or do you include people like the TAB as well? I'll go to you first, but I do also want to hear from Sean and Becky as well on this topic about the TAB and getting other externals included.
If a representative from the TAB walked into media committee, like there would be a real risk. It would not be a good moment. It's very much for the like ratified groups that we directly work with. The point is that they can have a channel through which to talk directly to the union, raise any issues they have, talk about the events that we're running. The TAB rhetoric in media committee is not a positive one. So yeah, it wouldn't really, they wouldn't really fit in. I think it's sort of the one thing they'll all unite against is the TAB.
Becky, is that similar situation for Sheffield? And I mean, to extend the question as well, there's a kind of an add-on as in other official media sites that you deal with.
Yeah, so I feel like maybe we have a similar situation in Sheffield as well. I would call it a healthy competition, perhaps. It's a lot of who's going to get the story out first, but also perhaps the way in which the story is framed would be approached differently in how Forge Press would do it. I we'll support them when those things happen, if, for example, they are approached by external media like the Tab. But we do also have a really brilliant communications coordinator that works in my office with me as well, who handles external media along with our SU president. That's part of their role. So generally my work is much more inward focusing on what the students need, and requests to kind of work. We don't really get a lot of requests necessarily from external press to speak with Forge, but they may obviously want to speak to our officers and things like that, and that's something that's handled by our communications coordinator rather than by myself. But Forge do work with that, with my colleague quite closely on those things as well, and with the university's media team. So there's actually quite a good working relationship there in terms of kind of getting statements out for stories from the university when they're trying to, when they want to print something that's kind of holding maybe the university to account for some actions. So those are the different kind of channels that we work through depending on the situation.
Yeah, I mean, we're much the same. A media committee, which would just be the committee that our magazine runs from. That's just for them. It's just for QMU members as well. So you have to be a member of the union to come along. All that rule is not that strict enforced. We do work a lot with like companies like The List. Again, being a music venue, it means we have to work with those promoters, and if they want to speak to our student media or our student media want to speak to them, then we just set up, like, we just go for coffee or whatever. We're quite lax. They contact me, and then whoever they want to speak to, just pass it on to them. There's not really any formal setting for our media team to meet up with others. Maybe if we had that across the campus in Glasgow, there wouldn't be so much competition, but you could probably say that about every single line of working that we have. The only thing we really work collaboratively on is welfare. Other than that, everything's quite competitive.
A healthy competition. It's also interesting to hear from campuses that have a really big variety of publications. Like, we have magazines, for example, that specify on one topic. We've got, I'm trying to think, kind of music and arts tends to be, certain magazines will only post about arts, others only do science. We've got one publication in Aberdeen that solely talk about cats, which I think is really cool. So we have all these little niches. If you have niches on your campus, or kind of, because I know Glasgow obviously have the Gist, are there other publications that are niches that you find end up competing for writers, or do groups kind of seem to be quite distinct in who writes for them each time?
No, I think the advantage of having niches is that it's only that niche that want to write for them. And I mean, of course, if you've got an interest, and if you've got an interest that crosses over, then there's nothing stopping you, as long as you're a member of the union, from getting involved with our magazine or with elsewhere. But the advantage of having specialised publications is, of course, that they have specialist writers, so tend to have enough room for everybody to get involved. But then again, it's important to remember that just because if you love science, that doesn't necessarily mean you don't want to go and review a Partick Thistle game and write. So it is about keeping the opportunities open to all. And as far as we work, you know, if someone had written for another publication but wanted to write for us, as long as what they wanted to write suited the sort of vibe of Communicate, then I'm sure they would let them. We're not, despite the competitiveness, our media team and our wider group of volunteers, you know, it's not like we limit them to just being part of us and being part of our building, although a lot of them do wear it as a literal badge of pride.
Yeah, we had a situation over the last year where we used to have a music magazine, and then for various reasons they decided to disband. And then their writers kind of then didn't have anywhere else to be. But we then also had a kind of fashion arts magazine who decided that they would include the previous music magazine as a section in their publication, which then gave those writers a space to kind of come in and join in with what they were doing, and then branch out into additional areas of that kind of niche in itself. So that was a kind of really nice way to keep this original magazine going, but like in its sort of new place where it could continue to be supported and engaged rather than just sort of disappearing into the ether. So that worked really well for us, I think.
It's interesting to hear, because it seems like for your campuses it's quite a different situation to what we have in Sheffield. We really do just have those kind of couple of other publications that I mentioned before, but otherwise I think there's a real push just to try and spread the word about Forge. I think primarily because it is free, and the aim is to be as inclusive as possible, anyone from any background writing anything that they want. That I think we've just tried to keep that as a kind of big, broad, open message, I guess, but which is nice because it means that we have often a really huge committee involved. We shrank it down. I think it used to be something like 40 actual editorial committee members, and that got a little bit much. So I think it's down to like 30 now, but then obviously a much broader kind of membership range from there, and it's obviously very flexible, because if you're not paying for it, it's kind of fine if there's a month or two where you just don't feel like you can get involved because uni work's too busy or something like that. But it's, I imagine, could be really beneficial in some ways to have that competition, to really make people kind of push to be like the best publication on campus. I think Forge's focus is like, can we just be the best publication in the UK instead?
It's certainly a big title. We'll see who gets crowned best publication in the UK at the national awards. We'll see what happens. We don't even know. Our judges are on furlough. We don't know. So that'll be something to look forward to. But a question we often get asked, so you've obviously got so many writers and there's so much going on, all these different publications. There's a couple of questions in the chat and also some offline that I've had. But how would you say is the best way to manage article proofing and mitigate any risks that could happen from, say an article wrote something that wasn't exactly right, or they've not followed up properly with something? Like, how would you mitigate risk on an article after publication, or even would you step in before it's published and say something? How would you handle all of that?
So at York we have what we call the Media Charter, which is like an appendix to our bylaws, and that basically covers things like legal and ethical risks, copyright, complaints, apologies, financial liability, that kind of thing. And all of our committee members for our media groups have to sign that they have read and agreed to the Media Charter. And the idea is that that's the kind of first check, the first kind of barrier for any risks like that. They've got access to David Banks, who I think has or is doing a session. I think most SUs around the country use him, and if you don't, you really should. He is fantastic. He comes in and does media law training with our groups, and they also basically have him on call if they've got a legal question. And so do we. So that's a kind of really nice two-way street, and he has some great relationships with the students that we work with. Happy to put you in touch if you'd like. And so they've got the Media Charter. They use that and the training they have to check themselves. They are also able to make amendments to the charter subject to media committee approval and trustee board approval. And then beyond that, before our papers get published, they are checked, or the most risk-heavy sections are checked, news, comment, that kind of thing. I don't do the checking. It's done by my manager and our communications manager. For us, that works really well because I'm not the one checking their content. I'm not the one messaging them and being like, you might need to change this, which in terms of good relationship management with our media groups works really nicely, because they can come to me with maybe a disagreement within their committee and not have this reservation that I might, if I'm irritated by them, pull something of their content later down the line. So we kind of draw this line really nicely where I'm the one for the problems and other people deal with the content. So I can't speak to the kind of specific moments where we would ask them to re-edit something, but generally we will work with them to get it published. It's very, very rare that we would pull an article from being written or from being published. It's just not really within our ethos to do that. We would intervene if there was a legal risk, an ethical risk, like they weren't adhering to the code of practices that we've set out, or if something had the potential to harm the welfare of a member of our union. That is the most difficult one to manage. It's set out in our media charter, and it's quite a complex one, and it happens very, very rarely. But those are the moments when we would intervene and try to rework what was going out. We obviously don't pull anything that is critical of the students' union or anything like that, despite accusations to the contrary. We always let that stuff go out. But yeah, if it's legally or ethically problematic, that's when we'd step in.
I think we're quite fortunate in Glasgow, or at QMU anyway, in that when it comes to the content, due to the sort of the nature of what our magazine writes about, but also the sort of politics of our union and of our magazine, they tend to very, very, very rarely stray in towards anything that would get them into trouble, which is really beneficial. I mean, they do have, I mean, copy editing is obviously a different sort of situation altogether. There's plenty of things that get picked up when it comes to design and spelling and grammar. Let's just get right to that. But the way we sort of help them manage it is really just to have sort of open conversations with the editors, and to have a relationship where they'll come into me if they feel like there's something they're not quite sure about. And I've only been responsible for it for sort of 6 months. And there's been articles that I've been like, that's, you know, that's quite risky, quite deep, but nothing that ever threatens their status or threatens the unions. It's also, if it's sort of reference to Dundee, where I worked before, I think there was more oversight in Dundee, because even though the media was independent, everything got run through one of the sabbatical officers there. I'll read the magazine before it goes out to print, but most of the time I'm just looking in case they've sort of made an error that would either be they've spelled something wrong, designed something wrong, they've cut an edge of the page off, or I'm sure if they said something libellous, then it would jump out. But our editors really, because they pay, or because they raise so much of the money themselves to get it printed, they take responsibility for what they put out. And we just ensure that, especially during their handover, that before they sort of take the role fully, that they're aware of the risks of having their name attached to the things they put out.
I'm in quite an interesting position in my role, because although I am entirely a member of staff, I'm not a student at all. I am the managing editor of Forge Press, which is not the same as the editor-in-chief. There is the elected editor, but part of my role is, as managing editor, to read through the entire paper before it gets published, and to flag any issues. In a similar way, design stuff is very much up to them, and I might flag a couple of things, but really those things are entirely up to them. We have quite like a thorough proofreading process in terms of like when to get content to me and the editor to sign off, and we leave a couple of days then for changes before the whole thing gets kind of pulled together and laid out. So within that process, normally I have a couple of days to identify any kind of trickier content. But in the same way as Lucy was saying, really very, very rarely, I can't think of an example where we've pulled an article. It's really been about establishing really good working relationships with the student media groups, with Forge Press, and it is difficult because I'm managing editor and I'm their pastoral support and everything else. So it is a fine line that I often have to tread, and there are very delicate conversations to be had, because everyone on student media, and myself too, feel passionately about freedom of the press and not being censored. So it can be a very delicate conversation to have when we think there might be some risks attached to the things that they want to publish. But it's about wherever possible, basically being really organized and having really clear deadlines, so that you know that you will have time to work those problems out before a print day, so that you're not rushing at the last minute to make a call which might then come round and cause some trouble later down the line. And we also use David Banks as well. He comes in to do media law training, and he's there to call. I do give him a call if we ever have some particularly hairy situations.
Yeah, he's great. He is actually speaking. It's tomorrow from 1 till 2 is his talk, and he's going to be talking about the essentials of media law. It is going to be primarily aimed at students who are in student media groups, but also for any members of staff who are interested in kind of different things and different ways that they can have that sensitive conversation about content and chat through it. A lot of questions that we get asked as well is if you are in that situation where you feel your publication has unfairly been asked to take something down, and going forward, perhaps like Lucy, what you said about having a constitution that lays it out very clearly, how easy is it, from your knowledge of kind of your student media teams that you've worked with, and also the union and university as a whole, how easy is it to put in any kind of constitutions like that, or even write a new one from scratch or amend something existing?
The Media Charter has been in existence for a long time. I'm happy to share it with anyone if they'll be interested, if it'll be helpful. So I can't speak to how easy it was when it first came in. Wouldn't surprise me if there was quite a lot of resistance. It's quite a kind of collaborative effort these days. Changes, we did a big amendment to it last year, and changes went back and forth between committee. Generally, everyone agrees it's a useful thing. It's something they refer to. It is generally a useful thing for them to kind of have on hand and understand. And it's useful in that it sets out things like a code of practice, which if you do want to be a professional journalist, you're going to have to adhere to that kind of thing anyway. So I think now it's in place, it's a really good thing and a useful thing. I think it's a good project, but coming at it from an angle of like, this will help you, this will make sure that you are doing things ethically, and that we can work together really collaboratively and well through using this, would be the way to approach it. But I would work hard to make it, as kind of collaborative as possible. I think that would be my advice. But it has been there for a very long time, so I hate to think what it was like when it first got introduced.
It's definitely, we're getting a couple of comments just to say if you could please share that when you get a moment. Even if you share it with me, I can put it in tomorrow's newsletter. It'll go out to SBA, or if you've got a moment, you can find it just now on your laptop. If you just put it on the chat, that'd be really, really helpful. Becky, I don't know if you want to continue that question. I'm just going by the order on my screen.
Yeah, we have a few different reference points for Forge to sort of refer back to. So within the SU's entire constitution, there are some bylaws specifically about the student media, and that outlines just some of the broadest points that are sort of vague do's and don'ts, but it outlines sort of how important they are, and that they are there to hold the university, the officer, the SUs to account. But there are some kind of limitations, like they aren't allowed to report on staff, because the SU does need to obviously make sure that staff are protected, and also obviously stuff about charity law, so we have to be cautious about how we report on elections and things like that. And then Forge have their own charter as well, so each individual group, so press has their own charter, and TV and radio, and it's pretty thorough, and that has sort of all their roles, their responsibilities, the expectations of how they want to operate, and quite thorough breakdown of that proofreading process. So it is quite a lot of information when a new committee member starts, I guess, at the beginning, to kind of take it all in. But that's why we do kind of a really big handover issue, where both new and old committee work together to deliver a paper, and it's quite sort of a elongated process to make sure they feel comfortable with it. And then myself and my manager developed a Forge Media risk management document, which was more for our own internal workings, which is more broadly identifying the risks that we need to keep an eye out on, because it is a lot, and it's important for the students to feel empowered, but also sometimes when you talk to them about media law and all the risks, and you say, hey, you know, it could be a fine or you could be imprisoned, yeah, it's not exactly very lighthearted, and I don't want to put them off producing the stuff that they want to do and writing the stuff that they want to write. So we kind of have our own internal risk management stuff that we work through as well, because we identify them as being a very high risk group compared to most of the societies and committees that we work with. So it's kind of like scattered through those 3 different areas, which are the main reference points.
Yeah, when it comes just to the simple question of changing the constitution of a media group, our media committee, their which is responsible for the magazine, their rules and bylaws are set out within the student union's bylaws itself. So if they want to change how they run, then they have to change the entire student union's bylaws, and if they want to change something larger than that, something constitutional, then you're talking an AGM for the whole, or an EGM for the whole union. It does seem difficult, but we just try, and it's one of those things where I would love to change it, but our union is probably more so than any other union completely student run. You know, the president could walk into my office and tell me to do something, and I would be expected to just drop everything I'm doing and doing it. So because we're not an association, we are an old school students union. But really beyond that, when it comes to working practices and stuff, which are probably the more important things, they just deal with that internally, and each year, each different editor brings a sort of own way of working to the things. But yeah, to the original question, if they want to change the sort of foundation of the publication, then unfortunately with our union, you have to change the foundation of the entire union to do that. If it is just bylaw changes, though, luckily they only just go through our student assembly, which is our version of a student representative council. So it's not too bad, as long as it's nothing radical, because if it is something radical, then you're going to have to convince a majority of the councillors around the table or not councillors, representatives around the table to vote with you, which is never as easy as it sounds.
Never is, for sure. I've popped another resource in the chat as well, which is just to do on this topic. It's an SU media guide written by NUJ. It is a couple of years old now, but it is still very, very relevant in what they've written. I believe back when it was written, a lot of student organisations and student media groups were actually consulted in making it. We are coming up for time, and I appreciate there's been an influx of questions. All the SPA sessions so far have had loads and loads of questions that we just sadly can't read out on air, but we can obviously take it to the not recorded coffee chat afterwards. But just to finish off with one last question, people often do ask as well, and I've got a couple of questions here, of how, when you're a student union rep, how would you prioritise sharing content from societies versus the student media groups? And also, if there's multiples of each, or like multiple student media groups, sorry, how would you prioritise one over the other?
Well,
or maybe
yeah,
oh, yeah.
With societies, it is more, we just try and provide the platform for which those places can reach themselves. We very rarely would use our official channels to promote a student group, unless it was something charitable, then we wouldn't put it out through our own sources. We have all the events of every committee listed on our Facebook, on our website as well, or we did have before. Went on furlough, and the website remained in the static position it was in on like the 28th of March or whenever it was. But when it comes to, again, lucky, we only have one student group. But if you go to Dundee when I worked there, then you just couldn't afford to give more room to one than another. But sometimes whichever editor shouts the loudest, and I think that's the reality, whichever one's battering down your door, they tend to get more attention because they make it impossible to ignore them. And whilst that's not the ideal way of working, I think that's the reality, is that whichever group is pressing you the hardest tends to be the one that you'll deal with, whether it's because you want to help them or whether it's because you want to get them away from your door is a different matter. But whichever one is the most forward in their need for help tends to be the one that gets the most help.
I think for us, because our media are committees rather than societies, there's just different channels that they go through. It is difficult because combined with like 27 different committees and 350 odd societies, there's a lot going on and it's really hard to promote everything. So I think it's true what Sean was saying, to an extent. It's like whoever shouts the loudest or can make the most creative kind of promotional stuff for what they're doing will get seen. But there's a few different channels depending on whether or not they're a society, in terms of like mailing lists and like SU highlights that get sent out, and in the physical building you can just reserve like digital screens and stuff like that. So it's, as long as they know what channels they can go down, the possibilities are there. But there is some benefits that come with them being a working committee because they have a direct staff support. So I'm there to kind of help shout about all the stuff that they're up to. So I try and be kind of a voice for them in the room when they can't be, which tends to mean that they don't get ignored too much.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And certainly, like, in my experience, a couple of years ago, we had an activities officer who was a former student newspaper editor. So for him, like, media was kind of top of the list. Like, that was the most important thing. And so it can quite often depend on where the activities officer's interests lie as to who gets more prioritised. And I think the difficulty for staff is to make sure that everyone feels like they're an equal priority. And for me, because I'm the only person that societies and media groups can go to, like, it's kind of a real sort of like thing at the top of my priority when I work, is to make sure that every group feels like they're kind of the top of my list. But the most important thing I think that we can do is to work to kind of empower all student groups, and particularly student media, to do the work they want to do themselves. I don't have a particularly loud voice on campus, but they can. I can help them feel like they do and help them have a louder voice by empowering them in terms of their confidence and their abilities and their skills. And for me, that's where the most important kind of part of my job with regards to student media is helping them feel that they can make the content they want to make tell the stories that they want to tell, and feeling like they can do that themselves, and we're just there to help them out if they get a bit stuck. In terms of sharing that content, I think if it's shareable, that's a great thing to share. Like, it's a great thing for officers to shout out about what their groups are doing, especially if it's particularly valuable, and to work with them on stories and campaigns. We try and do that a lot at York, often to like a good level of success. But I often find it's very variant on what the officer is interested in and how they want to engage with media. So yeah, from my perspective, it's just helping them to feel like they can be loud themselves, and making it about what they want to achieve and what they want to produce.
Ultimately, that if you don't ask, you won't get, seems to definitely be the advice there. But no, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation, and it's got so many people asking questions, which is amazing. We will unfortunately have to stop there and take it into the drop-in session, which we're a coffee shop. It's table 1. Everybody's free to attend that if you guys watching are able to, if panelists are able to. Feel lovely to see you there. And like I said at the beginning, the Student Radio Association are doing an extra session that's very closely related to this one, which is looking more at multimedia publications, multimedia groups instead of publications. So if you are able to go along to that, it's on Saturday from 5:30. But yeah, with that, thank you again so much to the panelists. It's been lovely having you, and I'm sure that we'll catch up again soon. If you have any resources that you want me to share out, do just drop me an email, and I'll get that shared to our student groups.
Yeah, I'm happy to share my email if anyone wants to get in touch as well. So I'll send that over to you, Mila. And if there's somewhere to put it, then yeah, happy to do that.
Yeah,
thanks, Mila, as well. Thanks to you for
thanks.
bringing this together.
You guys are very welcome. Bye-bye.
Right, thank you.
Bye.